Hello, my name is Steve Adolf, and welcome to our topic, a user story template. In previous topics, we introduced what a story was, and we explained why you were interested in user stories. In this topic here, I want to show you a simple template that you can use for formatting your user stories. Now, as it turns out, of course, if you ask 5 or 6 people for a user story template, you're likely to get 10 or 12 different templates. And part of the reason behind that, of course, is everyone has their own template, but also most people have a number of different needs within their organization and what information they want to track with the user story template. So what I would like to do in this section is at least introduce to you a minimal template. Basically, a minimum format for a user story. What's the absolute minimum information you need to track with the user story? Now, I've seen user story templates with like 10, 15, 20 fields. This one here has 5. Most of those fields are location dependent. Within an organization, there's information you need to track. But here's what I think you need to track minimally. You need a title, right? Every good story, of course, has a title, and user stories are no different. One of the things, though, that's really important about a user story title is that it usually can be a flag whether or not you've got a good user story or not. Being able to come up with a good title can really indicate, is this a user story or not? And the 2 attributes I think that are important on that are, 1, can you come up with a verb phrase name or verb phrase title for your user story? And second, is it intention revealing? So where this is going is to say, well, you come up with a title like user story 1, okay, bad, that's not a good user story. Traveler user story, well, there's not a lot of, that's really not a good verb phrase name, nor is it intention revealing. Upgrade seat. All right, now we've got a verb phrase. Now we have a decent intention revealing name. It says what the user story really is all about. The size. Most of you may have not gone through a topic on agile estimating. All I will say to this is that the size is intended to capture how big the user story is, not how long it's going to take to implement it. So generally the size is not recorded in hours or effort hours. It's meant to capture the size of the user story. We can talk more about that when we talk about agile estimation and user story points. The story itself, the 2 or 3 sentences that describe something of value to the stakeholder. The acceptance criteria. If you remember that, this is sort of like a bullet list of the criteria that we captured during the conversations with the product owner or stakeholder to help us elaborate this user story. And they also gives us the testable criteria to know, when are we done? When would this user story be accepted by the product owner? That nice little checklist. Yep, that's done, that's done, that's done. Now we can bring this story to the product owner for acceptance. Finally, the last field is sort of, I called it notes, but what it's really intended to be is a placeholder for all the other bits of information that you may want to capture with this user story. So this might be something, this might represent, well, maybe in your organization you'd like to capture who the author of the user story is. Maybe you want to indicate what the source of this, other information, a model reference. This is all the various things that different organizations may want to capture. So this is where you can get those 10, 15, 20 different fields associated with the user story. The point that I'm trying to make here, this is effectively 4 fields that are essential to a user story, and then this 5th one is sort of a representative or placeholder for all the other fields that you believe are going to be necessary to add to your user story template. One caveat I would give you, though, try to have fewer fields than more. Less is more in the agile world. So don't go nuts trying to come up with all different fields, but you want to keep this, ideally, keep this to a minimum, but keep it as simple as possible, as Einstein would say, but no simpler. So here's an example of what a user story might look like in this format. We have the title for the user story, upgrade seat, we have the size, we have the story itself, and then we have the acceptance criteria, and there might be notes associated with this. One thing I want to say about the story format, or the way that you can write the story, is this is something you'll see used, this format here is something you'll see used in a lot of user stories. This is a so-called Cone format that was popularized by Mike Cohn in about 2003 in his book, User Stories Applied. And it's a lovely format because it starts as a who. In other words, who wants the value of this user story? Who wants the benefit? Who is this important to? I want the what. Okay, what is it exactly that we want? And then the fun part, so that why. Why do I want this? So for example, as a traveler, I want to be able to upgrade my seat so that I can travel more comfortably. Right? And this is really wonderful when you're having the conversation with the team and the product owner, right? Because now you know who this is important to, you know what they want and why they want it, and that facilitates the conversation. Because knowing why somebody wants something and why it's valuable to them can help you really understand the scope of the story and also maybe design alternatives. So this is something to consider here. Don't get pedantic about this. Remember, the intention behind this of the user story is to try and capture these thin slices of value that we can deliver to a stakeholder, get their feedback, say, are we cruising into the valuable green, or are we finding our way into the wasteful red, and get their feedback quickly so that you can pivot, right? That's the intention. The Cone format, or that as a who, I want what, such that why, really facilitates this. But I've run into situations where it doesn't quite always work, or it doesn't quite always make sense, or sometimes it obscures the story. But don't use that as a simple excuse, well, we can't write it that way. Remember what the intention here. We want these thin vertical slices that we can quickly get feedback from with the stakeholders or the product owner. We're trying to avoid these so-called crud stories. And we don't want to have, read the database, perform some logic, update the user interface, because this delays getting feedback. So remember what the intent behind the user stories are when you're writing the story.